So I didn't do any of the Oscar commentary because I was at a party at Mr. Tim White's house, which was lovely. But I thought, I should do something because uh, it's Oscar night. It's special. Special things need to happen on Oscar night. So I thought that similar to how I read Victor in group, because it was a story more than a monologue, and it was just too long to have anyone ever perform. There's another date monologue, story, whatever, that I thought I've always wanted to hear, and so I thought, well, pardon, computer shaking. Okay, that I've always wanted to hear, and so I thought I could do a video of that in honor of Oscar night, and it sort of deals with art and artists, and so I thought I would go ahead and do that. So this is called The Date with Jason. And to give you a little background, I don't know if there is any background. It's kind of about dealing with artists and dating artists and what that's like, I guess. I should just read it. Okay. This is The Date with Jason. They compared notes in class during downtime when the teacher was trying to figure out how to get back around to productivity. Productivity. Anyway, he wasn't so much a professor as a mediator in any way. They were working on Dark Light, which was tonal. It was all in tones. The lack of boundaries was heavily felt, and maybe that was what inspired them. They compared notes on Jason. Yellen had gone out with him on Tuesday, which would normally have been Coast Day, but the beaches were filled with kids from the high school because there had been a broken pipe or something, so it seemed fine to use the opportunity to hang out with the kid. They talked at the gallery when Yellen's piece was displayed. Crush Divide was his first big piece, and he wasn't happy with it. It was too much. Just too much. And much of the time it was on display, he wanted to tear it down, rip it up, walk away from it. Frustrating, really. Jason didn't compliment him on it. That was the first thing he liked about him. But he also instantly didn't like him. He didn't like him like that, anyway. He wasn't sure why he'd agreed to the session. He had been with Nihilus for 2 years. Things were smashing, really terrific, but he told himself he wanted new friends. He had no real friends and absolutely no one outside of the program, but when he got there, he knew it was a date. But it still seemed harmless. Plus, there was nothing, absolutely nothing to Jason aside from good humor and conversation. So they talked. So they'd had a session, which consisted of Blue Oxygen and at the think tank, and then they'd parted ways. The whole night was over at 8:42 p.m., and the whole thing just seemed forgettable. So when Gertz brought Jason up during Dark Light, Yellen almost kept his mouth shut. But then the lecture had gone to studio, and studio had gone to nothing, which led Yellen talking to Gertz, which was somewhat unusual because they didn't really respond to each other. But before long, they were talking about Jason. Gertz had a bigger show at a gallery across town at the same time Yellen had his. Gertz's show was called Candy. It was much more pop-oriented and had no real value. This was the determination of Gertz's classmates, not Gertz himself, who found the entire show a breakthrough, both for himself and the class as a whole. He looked at the class as their coordinator did. They were a community. One success was the success of all. Gertz bought the bullshit because Gertz was the most successful. His date with Jason was more directly a date than the date with Yellen. For one thing, he didn't have a nails, although he had been bouncing about from Krish and Fenton ever since school started. Krish was into negatives, Fenton was into cedar collectives, and both of them were complete assholes, which Gertz responded to. Gertz and Jason had gone to Kingdom on Wednesday, and right from the start, Gertz knew Jason was nice, but not for him. Kingdom was just a series of kitchens. You sat at different tables, played with magnets on empty refrigerators, and never brought up that there weren't any sinks in the bathrooms. Jason dropped Gertz off at home, and they exchanged a friendly handshake, agreed to catch the potato show once Dagesh had finished it. It would be at the same gallery as Gertz's show. Strange thing, Jason hadn't brought up the show, not even once. The notes compared about the same between Yellen and Gertz. Nice guy, friendly, not interesting. The question of whether or not it was odd for Jason to have gone out with both Yellen and Gertz in the same week was, they were happy to admit, one that need not be asked. Nothing had happened on either date, and Jason was an undergrad at Frank nearby, so it wasn't unusual that there would be some mixing. They found that they actually had fun talking about Jason, not because there was something wrong with him, but because there wasn't. But neither could figure out why they didn't like him, more than just as someone to get oxygen with or try out the new tuna place downtown. Once the class was over, they got wraps at the cafe, then went back to their respective studios. Yellen got home around 11, which was an hour earlier than usual. He found he couldn't get lost in the work tonight, and it bothered him that Dagesh was getting a shot at the big gallery before he was. It would be a train wreck, but it was still an opportunity that he had not been afforded. When he got home, Niels was on the couch watching that day's episode of The Young and the Restless. Niels, what is this for again? My life structure piece. It's on soap operas? No. It's on camp value? Network lighting. I'm sorry? Every soap opera has a different look based on what network it's on. I don't follow. NBC soap operas are drenched with light. ABC's are very dark. And CBS? Like Candy. The mention of Candy made Yellen think of Gertz, which made him think of Jason. Were they out again tonight? Maybe at the Indie House? Maybe at Trains? Maybe at Core's party? But did it matter? Yellen didn't like Jason, not in a romantic way. They were friends. Niels was freeze-framing each shot of The Young and the Restless, then taking notes, then resuming, then freezing, then... Are you going to be doing this all night? Yeah, it's Krush, you know? Yeah. 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 Are you going to Core's party? Um, you know... Yeah, but, I mean, it could be fun. Yeah, so... Sure, I guess. You're gonna stay here? Yeah, I have to do Days of Our Lives before I go to bed. Alright, well, yeah. On his way out the door, he texted Jason. Hey, what are you up to? Gertz was laying in bed with Krish, wondering if he should have called Fenton because he was paralyzed with boredom. Krish was going on and on about the breakthrough he had during Dark Light or Light Dark or whatever class had been on today. Just brilliant, you know? Yeah. I just wish we'd gotten to Light. Yeah. Do you think we could tape this sometime? Sure. He hadn't even heard the question. The sex had been beyond lousy, and yet it had been how it had always been, and there was nothing to suggest that sex with Fenton would have been any better. Why didn't he like Jason? What exactly was wrong with him? Or was there something wrong with Gertz? Core's party. Huh? Gertz had zoned out, but hearing Krish mention Core's party had given him an idea. I said we should have gone to it. Yeah, but... Your negatives. God, yeah. Fuck, I'm so behind. Gertz knew that he would panic whenever you brought up his work. He immediately left wherever he was and headed back to his studio. Sure enough, there he was, picking his pants up off the floor, apologizing while buckling his nickel belt. Gertz didn't even say anything. He just let him rush out. Then he picked up his phone and sent the text. Hey, Jason. Want to go to a party? Because they were already on their way, Yellen and Gertz went to Core's party anyway, even when Jason didn't answer their texts. They were both relieved to see that neither had showed up with him, but then they went to different corners of Core's apartment and began to reflect, which is always a mistake. Core was showing footage of her piece. It was her third year working on it, and with each passing day it got more indiscernible. The footage she was showing now was just a series of clips, old commercials for toothpaste strung together while the Ramones played in the background. A group of the newer students clung to Core because they hadn't yet achieved the ability to see who had something to offer and who was destined for permanent study. Yellen picked at his nails and listened to Fenton drone on about Gertz, and whether Yellen thought that Gertz would get over this Krish fixation and finally see that he and Fenton could be this year's Liz and Liz, the lesbian duo that had conquered downtown in their final year with their double team on Hemingway Recliner. Gertz was drunk and getting drunker as the night wore on. He hated everybody at the party because nobody was Jason and nobody could be. When Yellen looked up from his shredded cuticle, Gertz was gone, and Yellen knew where he'd gone to. The restaurant was just closing up, and Jason was handing over the bill to his last table. He had mentioned to both Gertz and Yellen that he worked at a little place on the south side in addition to going to school. Gertz tried his dorm first, but when he wasn't there, he knew that he must be working. Yellen didn't bother trying the dorm because Jason didn't seem to like the type to ignore messages, which meant he must be at work. That's how Yellen got there first. Hey, Yell, how's it going? Are we friends? Excuse me? Friends. Are we... friends? We just hung out. I know. Do you want to be my friend? Sure. Yeah, I'd like to be. Great. Yellen made it out the door, realizing he sounded like a lunatic, and stopped. He'd have to go back in. He hadn't said what he wanted to say, although who the hell knew what that was, and when he turned around, he saw Gertz go right into the restaurant. Damn! Gertz was on his knees in front of Jason, a begging man in a faux Italian restaurant. It was truly pathetic. Not quite as pathetic as tripping over yourself while trying to run to a boy you just requested friendship from and landing at the feet of aforementioned boy next to the pathetic begging man. Jason looked perplexed. Marry me. Gertz, stop it. Shut up, Yellen. You have Nils. Does he know about Nils? The river? No, my boyfriend. He spells it with a Y. Everyone spells boyfriend with a Y. His name is Nils, but it can also be Niles, and never mind. Gertz stood up. Yellen stood up. Jason stood still, but contemplated running. Yellen took Gertz's hand. We're gonna go now. Okay. Sorry about this, Jason. It's okay. Let's go, Gertz. Jason, marry me. Let's go, Gertz. They walked for a bit, then stopped outside Vista and sat on one of the benches shaped like Mary and Faithful. That was idiotic. Really was. Why did I ask him to be my friend? I proposed marriage. We really need to evaluate our lives. The two classmates looked at each other. I wanted a real friend. I wanted a real guy. He felt real. He really did. They looked at each other. They looked away. There must be more. There must be. But to be honest, they really weren't sure.